Considering how much time it actually took me to work on this and finish it, this might be the dumbest 2 weeks that I spent doing anything. Anyway, welcome to another video. This video is going to be a little bit different. I'm just sitting here recording. This is not going to be super edited like one of my documentaries. And we're going to be discussing Red COVID. Now, what is Red COVID? Well, I saw it on Twitter and I decided to do some research on it. So whenever I went and looked around, it looks like it's this belief from more of the Democratic side, I'll be honest, that Republicans are perpetuating COVID-19 and letting it stay around, and by not getting the vaccine or wearing a mask and stuff like that. And they're talking about the hospitalization rates and how most of those people aren't vaccinated, which I didn't actually look at hospitalization rates because it's really hard for me to find data on that. So I went and did something a little bit different. I took my home state of Texas, which voted very heavily in the favor of Republicans. I don't remember exactly how many counties, but it was a whole bunch. But I took that state and combined it with a whole bunch of numbers from COVID-19, like the total number of infections, the vaccination percentage, and whether they voted Republican or Democrat in the last election. And I just tried to figure out what were the facts. So let's talk about the facts, I guess. So starting off, there are 254 counties in the state of Texas. In general, a lot of them voted Republican. 232 of them, in fact, actually voted on the Republican side, with the last 22 obviously voting Democratic. But I decided to do something a little bit different with how I wrote these down. If the election itself had the winner being under 60% and the loser being over 40%, I added a close election section. There were 216 elections that were won by Republicans that were outright won above 60%. But there were actually 16 elections that were won between a 60 and 40% margin. So that added a whole new dynamic to my research. The average number of infections for Republicans were 15%. For closer elections that the Republicans still ended up winning, it was also 15%. For the average number of infections for the Democratic won counties, it was 21%. And for the average number of infections for the Democratic counties that were close elections, it was actually 16%. Now this actually shows a pretty interesting dynamic because we just talked about how Red COVID was that the Republicans are perpetuating COVID, but it looks like the average number of infections are actually higher in Democratic counties rather than Republican ones. I'll get back to that a little bit later on because I actually have an interesting theory on that as to why that's a thing, but let's move on. The average percent of the vaccinated population for Republican won counties was 38%. For Republican won counties that were actually close, it was 51%. For the Democratic counties, it was 60%. And for Democratically won counties that were close, it was 58%. This shows a little bit closer to our political lines and how the Republicans tend to be more anti-vaccine and the Democrats tend to be more pro-vaccine. I'm not talking about in general, I'm talking about just for the COVID-19 vaccine. But I actually have a theory that does kind of affect this, but also kind of doesn't at the same time. So let's keep moving on. Going back to our average number of infections, why are the Democratic ones higher than the Republican ones? Because that's easy to see. It's a 6% difference just for Republican and Democrat. Well, I decided to try out population density because it's clear that to me and to most people online that the Democratic side was definitely the more in favor of the mask and wear the mask, get the vaccine, do everything you can, stop the spread. So I decided to look at the numbers of the population of the counties and how they voted. I decided to split this up into 7 different categories. The population under 1,000, the population under 20,000, the population under 50, 100,000, 500,000, under a million, and then over 1 million. And I did that for every single county. Anyway, looking at it, we can see that these numbers, they're pretty heavily in the Republicans' favor. But looking at these numbers more specifically, we can see that under 500,000 people, the Republicans won pretty much 90% or above. And then over that, the Democrats tend to be more in the majority. I think this also shows that the population density does play a factor. I didn't look at the specific population density of each county, but I think the higher the population density, the more people that end up getting sick, which is one of two things. It's a very obvious assumption that we can see just about anywhere. And 2, it has a lot of historical accuracy backed with it. I know that COVID-19 is nowhere near the spread of something like the Black Plague or the Spanish flu, but if we look back at the Black Plague, we can see that parts of Europe, which were really underdeveloped at that time, only had, death rates of 10% or even 15% in some places. Obviously, there were higher, like up to a third in some places, but in general, a lot of the rural areas had 10%. But if you look at Constantinople at the time, which was the biggest city on the planet, they lost like 25% to 33% of their entire population just from the Black Plague because they were more densely packed. So I think this is why the average number of infections are actually higher for Democrats, and it's pretty interesting to see that. Now, as for the average number of the vaccination population and why that varies so extremely, I think that has a two-parter. I think part one is obviously the political beliefs. A lot of Republicans tend to not want to get the vaccine because of whatever reason they have. And a lot of Democrats tend to be more pro-vaccine because they want to stop the spread, essentially. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so high, especially if you look at like Democratic one, specifically Democratic one and Republican ones. But I think that another part is the fact that it really hasn't affected the Republicans that bad. I mean, yeah, 15% is definitely 15%. But I think that part of it is since the population density tends to be lower in Republican counties and they're not as affected, that people don't really see a reason to go out and get it. And I think that with Democratic one counties, people have seen COVID really affect them. You know, it's over 20%. And so people tend to go out and get the vaccine more. I don't think that explains such a dramatic increase from, 38% to 60%. That's, nearly double. But I think that does explain some of it. Because for someone like me, I didn't actually get the vaccine until around April. But that was only after COVID had really started to affect me. And I really ended up getting on the list for it because I am a younger guy. But even other people in my family didn't really even get the vaccine until, later on, until it actually affected us. That wasn't because we didn't trust the vaccine or we didn't want to get the vaccine. We just didn't care to or didn't have a reason to. And I think that's the way a lot of people are. We need to stop thinking about people as, strictly Republican or strictly Democrat. If someone says they're Republican, you can't think that they're like the Proud Boys or something. But you can't look at a Democratic person and think they're super, I don't know what the term is, but newer nowadays, like the new beliefs nowadays. I won't get into specifics of some of the different stereotypes that affect them, but we can't believe everyone's like that. That's just a minority of people. That's personally what I believe. Anyway, I did this just for Texas, and my sample size wasn't necessarily the best. Like I said, 232 or something counties were won by Republicans, and only like 22 were won by Democrats. So I did think about doing like another state, like maybe New York, that had a more Democratic side. But in general, I think the numbers worked out well, because even though the different percentages tended to be a little bit different, even looking at just the straight percentage of each individual county, it doesn't really look that much difference. And that goes for both the infected population and the vaccination percentage. Obviously, there are complete outliers, like the county of Comel, which has a population of over 161,000 people. It actually has a vaccination rate of 61% and an infection percentage of only 11%, and it was won by Republicans. So that kind of shows that it's a little bit of an outlier because it has a lower infection rate and a higher vaccination population. And it's Republican, so that's just weird. But in general, this is what the averages are, and that's kind of what I'm speaking on. So it's good to know that not every county is like that. Although, if this video does get enough reception and people want to see part 2, or they want to see me do a different state, or really just like anything that does with just numbers or something, I don't really mind doing stuff like this. I really like it. Although I will say I looked at a lot of numbers. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for today. This was just a little recording that I wanted to make about Red COVID and what it was. And honestly, do I think Red COVID is real? Not really. That's my belief. To me, it doesn't really seem like Red COVID is a thing. It does seem like somewhat, but not entirely, like how some people are saying. Because, the infection percentage is actually lower in Republican counties than Democratic ones. I didn't look at hospitalizations or deaths because those numbers are hard to come by. If you look at the vaccination percentage, we can see it's lower in Republican counties, but I don't really see... There's 2 reasons for that, and I don't really see either one being a majority theory. So yeah, I guess I'll catch you guys next time. If you guys have anything else you want me to look at, write down in the comments. Peace.